Welcome to Grandma's Tales. I am so glad you are here with me tonight. Close your eyes, get tucked under your warm, heavy blanket, and take a deep, slow breath. Feel the weight of the covers and the softness of your pillow. Today, we have a very special story. One that has been whispered by fireplaces for over 100 years. It is a story about an old master tailor, a very proud cat, and the tiny secret wonders that happen in the quietest hours of the night. Have you ever wondered what the world looks like when the stars are the only lanterns left in the sky? Deep in the ancient city of Gloucester, where the stone cathedrals reach up to touch the moon, and the snow falls like powdered sugar on the narrow, winding streets, a secret is waiting. It is hidden behind a small, weathered wooden door, in a place where time seems to slow down, and every shadow holds a spark of gold. This story will lead us to the quietest place in the world. A workshop filled with the scent of old oak, beeswax, and expensive silk. It is a place where every stitch tells a story of a lifetime of patience. Tonight, we will find that even when we feel tired, even when the task seems too great for our hands, help often comes from the most unexpected, tiny friends. Rest now, little one, for sleep is coming as softly and as surely as a mouse's footprint in the deep, white snow. In the time of swords and periwigs, when the world moved to the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons, there lived an old master tailor in the city of Gloucester. He lived in a small house in College Court, squeezed between the tall, leaning buildings near the cathedral gate. The city outside was a maze of grey stone and timber, but the tailor's world was one of vibrant colour and delicate textures. He was a small, frail man whose hair had turned as white as the winter frost that crusted the window panes. His spectacles, round and thin-rimmed, always perched precariously on the very tip of his nose, and he had a habit of looking over them with kind, watery eyes. His back was slightly curved, like a bow that had spent many decades leaning over the finest fabrics in the kingdom. He wore a simple linen shirt, bleached white as a cloud, and a worn brown waistcoat with pockets filled with bits of string and beeswax. His hands were a map of his life. They were lined with the marks of time, and they trembled ever so slightly when he reached for his tea. But the moment they held a needle, they became steady and strong. He moved through his shop with the quiet grace of a shadow, his footsteps muffled by the piles of fabric scraps that carpeted the floor like autumn leaves made of velvet and satin. Beside him, on his cluttered, heavy oak work table, lay his most precious possession, a heavy silver thimble engraved with a tiny, delicate rose. This was his totem, his anchor. It had been given to him by his own master 50 years ago, on the day he became a freeman of the city. The silver was worn smooth and shiny from millions of stitches. To the tailor, the thimble felt warm, as if it held the memory of every coat and waistcoat he had ever finished. But tonight, the master tailor was worried. He looked up at the great clock on the workshop wall, its brass pendulum swinging with a slow, heavy thrum. Outside, the great cathedral tower answered, dong, dong, dong. The sound rolled over the snowy rooftops like a deep velvet wave. "Only 3 days until Christmas," the old man whispered to his cat, Simpkin. Simpkin was a large, handsome ginger cat with ears like velvet triangles and a very proud, striped tail. He sat upon a roll of grey wool, watching the old man with eyes like polished jade. "The Mayor of Gloucester is to be married on Christmas morning, Simpkin, and I have yet to finish his magnificent wedding waistcoat. It must be cherry-coloured silk embroidered with pansies and roses. If I do not finish it, I shall be a ruined man. No one wants an old tailor who cannot meet a deadline." The old man reached out and unrolled a length of the silk. It was the most beautiful fabric in Gloucester, a deep, glowing cherry red that seemed to hold the warmth of a summer sunset. It shimmered in the dim light of his single tallow candle, reflecting warm golden tones against the dark, smoke-stained wooden walls. Beside it lay the linings, yellow lutestring and white taffeta, as soft as a moth's wing. But then the tailor looked at his spool. His heart sank. "Simpkin," he sighed, his voice echoing in the quiet shop. "I have but one single skein of cherry-coloured silk twist left. Just 1 penny's worth. I must be careful, so very, very careful. There is no more of this silk in all the city, and the shops are closing for the frost." The cold of the Gloucester winter began to seep through the cracks in the door, carrying with it the sharp, clean scent of wet stone and frozen river water. The old tailor shivered, pulling his waistcoat tighter. He reached into his deep, tattered pocket and found his very last penny. "Here, Simpkin," he said, holding the copper coin in his trembling palm. "Take the penny. Walk carefully through the snow to the grocer's. Buy me a groat's worth of milk, a groat's worth of bread, and, most importantly, Simpkin, a pen'orth of cherry-coloured silk twist. Do not play with the field mice, and do not lose the coin. For without that twist, the mayor's coat will remain a dream, and my silver thimble will have no work to do." Simpkin took the coin in his mouth, gave a flick of his tail, and vanished into the blue twilight of the snowy street. While Simpkin was gone, the old man sat alone in the deepening shadows. The workshop was silent, save for the wind whistling a lonely tune in the chimney and the occasional pop of the dying fire. The candlelight flickered, making the rolls of fabric look like sleeping, colourful creatures. Suddenly, the tailor heard a sound, a very, very small sound. Tip-tap, tip-tap, tip-tap. It sounded like tiny hammers on tiny anvils. The old man picked up his candle, the flame dancing and casting long, flickering shadows that looked like giants stretching across the ceiling. He moved toward the kitchen cupboard, his slippers whispering on the floorboards. He saw a row of small wooden bowls that sat upside down on the shelf. With a curious smile, he lifted the first bowl. To his amazement, out stepped a tiny mouse. The mouse made a polite, elegant bow. He was wearing a miniature coat of fine green thread and tiny breeches. The tailor lifted another bowl, another mouse, and another. Under each bowl, a little tailor mouse had been busy, perhaps dreaming of its own tiny waistcoats. The old tailor did not reach for a trap. He did not shoo them away. Instead, he reached for a few dry crumbs of his morning crust that had fallen into his pocket. "You must be hungry, little ones," he murmured, his eyes twinkling with a grandfatherly warmth behind his spectacles. "It is a cold, bitter night for everyone, even for the smallest creatures in Gloucester." He left the crumbs on the shelf and went back to his chair, feeling a strange sense of peace. He did not see that Simpkin had returned through the cat flap. The cat stood in the shadows, his green eyes glowing with a dark jealousy, watching the mice eat the crumbs. Simpkin was tired. His fur was wet with snow, and he was in a very bad mood. He took the cherry silk twist he had bought, and instead of giving it to the tailor, he hid it deep inside a blue willow teapot on the high dresser. That night, the heavy winter air took its toll. The old master tailor grew very, very ill. The fever burned in his cheeks, and his breath came in short, tired gasps. He could not stand, let alone hold a needle. He lay in his small bed in the attic room, the silver thimble resting uselessly on the nightstand, catching the cold light of the moon. Outside, the blizzard grew stronger. The snow piled high against the shop door, sealing it shut with a wall of white. Inside, Simpkin sat on the bed, purring loudly, but he did not tell the tailor where the silk twist was. For 3 days and 3 nights, the workshop remained dark and frozen. The mayor's waistcoat lay on the table unfinished, its beautiful cherry silk covered in a fine layer of dust. Tick-tock, Christmas is coming. Tick-tock. The old man dreamed of red silk and golden needles, but in his dream, the thread always broke. It was now Christmas Eve. The moon was a giant silver coin in the sky, reflecting off the ice-covered cobblestones and the frozen gargoyles of the cathedral. Inside the dark workshop, a tiny light began to glow, not from a candle, but from the magic of a kindness remembered. It started as a single spark near the cupboard, then a dozen, then hundreds of golden dust particles began to swirl and dance in the air, illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the frosted windows. The mice came out. Not just 3, but hundreds of them, coming from behind the wainscoting and under the floorboards. They were the mice of Gloucester, and they had heard that the kind old man was ill. They climbed the table legs with tiny scratching claws. They picked up the silver needles, which were like heavy spears to them. They found the scraps of silk and the yellow lute string. Stitch, stitch, stitch. Working in teams of 4, they pulled the heavy needles through the silk. They used their tiny paws to smooth the velvet. Their movements were a rhythmic dance, a silent ballet performed on a stage of cherry-red fabric. They embroidered the pansies with purple thread and the roses with pink. They finished the buttonholes with the finest, most delicate stitches ever seen in the history of tailoring. The air was thick with the scent of magic and old roses. The mice sang a tiny, silent song as they worked through the night, returning the kindness the old man had shown them when he gave them his last crumbs. Every stitch was a thank you. Every knot was a get well soon. But as the clock struck midnight and the bells of Gloucester began to ring for Christmas, the mice stopped. They looked at the edge of the waistcoat. There was one buttonhole left to finish. They searched the table, they searched the floor, but they could not find the cherry silk twist. It was still hidden in the blue willow teapot, and Simpkin was guarding it with a grumpy heart. On Christmas morning, the sun rose over the Severn River, painting the snow-covered city in shades of brilliant gold and soft, glowing pink. The air was crisp and silent. In the attic, the old master tailor woke up. The fever had broken as if by a miracle. His head was clear and his strength had returned. But his heart was heavy with a terrible sadness. "The wedding," he croaked, his voice thin and fragile in the cold morning air. "Today is the wedding, and the waistcoat is not done. I have failed the mayor, and I have failed my craft." He dressed slowly, his bones aching, and hobbled down the narrow, creaking stairs to his shop. He expected to see a room of shadows and a ruined dream, but when he pushed open the heavy wooden door, he stopped. He gasped, and his spectacles nearly fell from his nose. The room was filled with a warm, golden light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The dust particles in the air looked like floating flakes of gold. There, laid out perfectly on the dark oak table, was the mayor's waistcoat. It was a masterpiece. The cherry silk glowed like a ruby. The embroidered flowers looked so real that one might expect to smell their fragrance. The stitches were so small, so perfect, that they seemed to have been made by the wind itself. It was the most beautiful garment in all of England. Simpkin, watching from the corner, saw the look of pure joy on the old man's face. He saw the tears of relief in the tailor's eyes. The cat's heart, which had been cold and grumpy for 3 days, finally melted like the ice on the window pane. He walked to the dresser, jumped up to the blue willow teapot, and fished out the cherry silk twist. He brought it to the old man's feet, dropped it, and let out a long, deep, apologetic purr. The master tailor picked up the silk and looked at the tiny, empty wooden bowls on the shelf. He saw a single, tiny mouse tail vanish behind a roll of blue cloth. He looked at his silver thimble, which seemed to sparkle with a supernatural light. He didn't scold Simpkin, and he didn't try to explain the magic. He simply sat down and realized that when you put kindness into the world, no matter how small the crumb, it always finds its way back to you, often carried on the smallest of paws and the quietest of hearts. The wisdom of the needle, the old man said softly, patting Simpkin's soft ginger head, is that even the smallest stitch matters in the great, beautiful pattern of life. We are all connected, Simpkin, from the mayor in his castle to the mouse in the cupboard. The mayor was married that morning in the cathedral, wearing the cherry-coloured waistcoat. People talked about those stitches for 100 years, wondering how any human hand could be so delicate and so true. And the old Tailor of Gloucester never went hungry or lonely again. He always kept his workshop warm. He always shared his bread. And the mice of Gloucester always made sure that his needles were threaded with the golden thread of luck. The snow is still falling softly over the ancient stones of Gloucester. But the workshop in College Court is warm and full of love. It is time for you to dream now, little one. May your dreams be filled with golden light, the scent of lavender, and the knowledge that you are never truly alone. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 5-year-olds, stay on our channel. Sleep well, and remember the story of the tiny stitches. The end. Have you ever wondered what the world looks like from the height of a tiny, twitching nose? Far beyond the busy roads, behind the old mossy stone walls, there is a hidden garden where the sunlight feels warm and soft, like a golden blanket. This is a very special place. A secret world where the big green cabbage leaves reach up to a deep blue sky. Every shadow tells a little story. Every rustle of a leaf is a tiny secret. And the golden dust dances in the air like magic memories from long ago. Today, we are going to follow a very brave, very curious little rabbit on a journey that will take us through sun-dappled paths and hidden burrows. We will walk through the high grass where the dew still clings like diamonds to the blades of green. As the golden dust dances in the air, you will feel your breath slow down. Your heart will find its calmest beat. By the time we reach the end of the garden wall and return to the warmth of the sandbank, you will be wrapped in a blanket of peace, ready for the deepest, most beautiful sleep. Once upon a time, in a place where the air always smells of pine needles, warm earth, and the faint, sweet scent of wild thyme, there were 4 little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a cosy, sandy bank, nestled deep underneath the roots of a very large, very ancient fir tree. This tree was a giant of the woods, a sentinel of the forest, with bark as thick as armour, covered in silver moss and velvet green lichen. Its roots twisted like the fingers of a sleeping giant, creating hollows and secret rooms where the family felt safe from the world above. The needles formed a soft, fragrant carpet outside their door, a carpet that muffled every footstep and turned the forest floor into a place of hushed silence. Inside the burrow, the air was still and smelled of dry sand and warm fur. It was a place of perfect safety, lit by the soft amber glow that filtered through the tangled roots. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow of great dignity and grace. She wore a clean white apron and a small lace cap, and her whiskers were always neatly groomed. On this particular morning, the golden sunlight filtered through the tree roots in long, slanted beams, casting dancing shadows of the forest floor across the sandy walls of their home. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit, her voice as soft and comforting as the velvet on her own ears. "You may go into the fields or down the lane, but do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor many years ago. It is a place of great beauty, but the stakes are high, and the gate is heavy." She reached for Peter, the smallest of the litter, yet the one with the most restless spirit. She pulled out his most prized possession, a totem of his identity, a blue wool jacket. It was made of the finest heavy cloth, dyed the deep, rich colour of a summer sky just before the stars begin to wake. She fastened the brass buttons one by one, and they shone like 5 tiny golden suns against the blue. Click, click, click. The jacket felt warm and substantial against his soft brown fur, a shield of wool against the morning chill. "Run along now," she whispered, leaning down to nuzzle his nose. "And don't get into mischief. I am going out to the baker's to buy a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns for our tea." Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, did exactly as they were told. They went down the lane to gather blackberries, moving with a slow, rhythmic grace. The lane was a peaceful place, lined with ancient hedgerows where the birds sang songs of the morning. They focused on the deep purple berries, each one a tiny cluster of sweetness, cool and damp with the morning dew. They moved from bush to bush, their little baskets swinging gently, their hearts full of the simple joy of the harvest. But Peter felt the weight of the brass buttons on his chest, and the thrum of a wild, forbidden curiosity in his pores. He did not look at the blackberries. He did not look at the lane. He looked only toward the heavy iron gate of Mr. McGregor's garden, standing like a sentinel at the edge of the woods. The garden was a world of forbidden emeralds and hidden treasures. Peter squeezed his slender body under the gate, feeling the cold, rusted iron graze the blue wool of his jacket for just a heartbeat before he popped through. Inside, the world was transformed. The air was thick and heavy with the scent of damp earth, crushed mint, and the sharp, peppery aroma of ripening vegetables. It was a paradise for a hungry rabbit. First, he ate some lettuces, their leaves so crisp and cool they felt like ruffled silk against his tongue. Then he ate some French beans, snapping them with a satisfying pop that echoed in the quiet garden. And then he found the radishes, bright, vibrant globes of red hidden beneath the soil. Peter sat among the giant cabbage leaves, which were as large as umbrellas and heavy with the morning's moisture. The sunlight, filtered through the thick green veins of the leaves, turned the entire patch into a shimmering emerald diorama. Thousands of golden dust particles, the lumi dust, danced in the shafts of light that pierced the canopy of green. Peter felt a sense of profound peace, the kind that only comes from a full belly and the warmth of a hidden sun. He watched a ladybug crawl across a leaf, its red shell glowing like a jewel in the chiaroscuro light. But soon, feeling rather sick from the richness of the radishes, he stood up and went to look for some parsley to settle his stomach. The parsley patch was nestled near the greenhouse, where the air was warm and smelled of old terracotta and potting soil. The stems were green and curly, holding droplets of water like tiny crystal beads. Peter nibbled slowly, feeling the fresh herbal taste clear his mind. He looked up at the vast expanse of the garden, the rows of peas stretching out like a green sea, and for a moment he forgot the warnings of his mother. He felt like the king of this secret world, a small blue figure in a vast landscape of gold and green. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? The gardener was on his hands and knees, planting out young cabbages with careful, calloused hands. But at the sight of the blue jacket, he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out in a voice like rolling thunder, "Stop, thief! Stop, thief!" Thump, thump, thump. The sound of Mr. McGregor's heavy leather boots hitting the garden soil was the ticking clock of Peter's adventure. A heavy, metallic rhythm that signalled the end of his peace. Peter was most dreadfully frightened. His heart hammered against the brass buttons of his jacket as he rushed all over the garden, for in his panic he had forgotten the way back to the gate. In his frantic flight, the unthinkable happened. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. leaving his paws bare against the cold, damp earth. Without his shoes, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, a blur of brown and blue moving through the rows of vegetables. He might have got away altogether if he had not, unfortunately, run into a gooseberry net. The large, shiny brass buttons on his jacket, the very things that made him feel so grand, now became his trap. They caught in the mesh of the net, holding him fast. Peter gave himself up for lost, and shed big, heavy tears that rolled down his whiskers and soaked into the soil. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement, their wings fluttering like 100 tiny fans. They chirped and implored him to exert himself, to find the strength within his small frame to break free. Mr. McGregor approached with a heavy wooden sieve, intending to pop it over Peter like a cage. But Peter, with one final, desperate wriggle, slipped out of his jacket just in time. He left the beautiful blue wool and the golden buttons behind, abandoned in the net as he fled toward the safety of the shadows. He rushed into the dark, cool silence of the potting shed and jumped into a large tin water can. It would have been a beautiful place to hide, a silver sanctuary, if it had not had so much cold water in it. Peter sat there, shivering, his fur matted and wet. The water was icy cold, and the metal walls of the can echoed with every sound. Drip, drip, drip. Outside, he could hear the scrape of a spade. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. The air in the can grew heavy and damp, and suddenly Peter could not help it. He sneezed. "Kertissue!" The chase began again with renewed fury. Peter jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 pots of geraniums that shattered on the ground. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor to follow, and the gardener was growing tired of running after such a fast little rabbit. He wiped his brow and went back to his work, grumbling under his breath. Peter sat down in the shade of a large leaf to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with a fright that reached down to his very bones. He had not the least idea which way to go, and he was very damp and uncomfortable from sitting in that can of water. After a long time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all round the garden for a way home. He found a wooden door in a high stone wall, but it was locked tight. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas in her mouth to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, his voice small and trembling. But she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him with a look of quiet pity. Peter began to cry again, his tears falling onto the cold stone. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, through the labyrinth of beans and broccoli. Presently, he came to a quiet pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, like a statue carved from snow. But now and then, the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard stories about cats from his cousin, Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, feeling the weight of the silence around him. But suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the rhythmic noise of a hoe. Scrit-it, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes and waited. But presently, as nothing happened, he grew bolder. He came out and climbed upon a wooden wheelbarrow, peeping over the edge. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him, gleaming in the distance, was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as his tired legs would carry him. He ran along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes, the wind whistling past his ears. Mr. McGregor caught a glimpse of him at the corner, but Peter did not care for rakes or shouts any more. He slipped underneath the gate like a shadow and was safe at last in the deep, dark wood outside the garden walls. Peter never stopped running, nor did he look behind him, until he reached the towering shadow of the big fir tree. He was so exhausted that he flopped down upon the nice, soft, warm sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy at the stove, the smell of wood smoke and herbs filling the burrow. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and the second pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a single fortnight. But there was no anger in the burrow on this golden evening. There was only the quiet, profound relief of a family reunited under the roots of the world. Peter was not very well during the evening, his adventures having taken a toll on his small frame. His mother put him to bed with gentle hands, not as a punishment for his wandering, but as an act of grace and protection. She brewed a special pot of chamomile tea. The steam rose in the golden light of the burrow, carrying the scent of dried flowers, safety, and home. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime, she whispered, stroking his long ears until his breathing became slow and deep. As Peter sipped the warm floral tea, he finally understood. The garden was a place of excitement and bright emeralds, but the burrow was the place of the heart. Courage had taken him to the gate, and curiosity had led him through it, but it was the love of his mother and the safety of the fir tree that had brought him home. Outside, Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail finished their supper of bread and milk and blackberries. They ate slowly, enjoying the peace of the evening in the perfect golden silence of the woods. Thank you for listening to this beautiful tale. I hope Peter's journey has brought a sense of peace to your heart tonight. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel and explore our other golden stories. Sleep well, little ones, and remember, there is always a safe way home. Goodbye for now. Welcome to Grandma's Tales. Today, we have a beautiful bedtime story for toddlers and preschoolers. Sit back, get comfortable under your warm blanket, and let the quiet sounds of the autumn forest wash over you. Have you ever wondered why the autumn leaves whisper so softly when the wind blows through the trees? Or what secrets are hidden on the misty island in the middle of the lake where the old wise owl lives? Today, we are going to visit that very island. This story will lead us to the quietest place in the world, where the water ripples like a gentle lullaby, and where sleep comes as easily as a falling leaf. Together with a little squirrel named Nutkin, we will learn why some secrets are best kept quiet, and how even the most playful hearts can find peace at the end of the day. Once upon a time, at the edge of a deep, ancient forest, there lived a family of red squirrels. They had soft, russet fur, bushy tails, and bright, curious eyes. Among them was a young squirrel named Nutkin. Now, Nutkin was different from his brother Twinkleberry and his many cousins. While the other squirrels were busy gathering acorns and sorting pine cones for the coming winter, Nutkin preferred to play. In his tiny paws, Nutkin always carried his most prized possession, hollowed golden hazelnut shell. It was perfectly smooth, polished by his touch, and it made a tiny soft click-clack sound whenever he rolled it between his fingers. This little hazelnut shell was his totem, his treasure, and his constant companion. He would spin it on flat stones, peer through its tiny hole at the autumn sun, and listen to the wind echoing inside it. "Nutkin," Twinkleberry would whisper as the autumn wind began to blow colder, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen birch leaves. "The days are growing shorter. The great clock of the forest is ticking. Look at the golden birch leaves. They are falling faster every day. Soon the frost will lock the ground, and we must have our winter store ready." But Nutkin only laughed, a sound like tiny silver bells, and spun his golden hazelnut shell on a mossy root. Click-clack, click-clack. "The forest is full of treasures today, dear brother. Why worry about tomorrow when the sun is still shining through the hazel bushes?" In the very middle of the great, still lake, there lay an island. It was covered in thick groves of nut trees, heavy with the finest, ripest, brown hazelnuts. And in the heart of this island, inside the hollow of a massive, ancient oak tree, lived an old owl named Old Brown. Old Brown was wise, silent, and very dignified. He did not like to be disturbed, and the forest animals knew that one must always show him the greatest respect. The time had come for the squirrels to cross the water to gather the nuts. One quiet, misty morning, the squirrels went down to the edge of the lake. They brought with them little rafts made of birch bark and dry twigs. They used their bushy tails as sails, catching the gentle morning breeze, and paddled across the glassy, still water. Each squirrel carried a little sack for the nuts, and they also brought a special gift for Old Brown, to ask for his permission to gather food on his island. All of them, that is, except Nutkin. While Twinkleberry and the cousins carefully carried a fine, plump, fat mouse as a respectful offering for the old owl, Nutkin sat at the edge of his birch bark raft, tapping his hollow golden hazelnut shell against the wooden side. Tap, tap, tap. "Be quiet, Nutkin," whispered Twinkleberry, looking nervously across the misty water. "We must not anger the lord of the island." But Nutkin only smiled, looking at the ripples in the water, feeling the cool air on his whiskers. The little rafts touched the soft, sandy shore of Owl Island. The squirrels stepped out, carrying their baskets and their precious offering. They marched in a neat, quiet line up to the great oak tree where Old Brown sat on his high branch, his large golden eyes half closed, looking like a statue of ancient stone. Twinkleberry and the other squirrels bowed very low. They laid the fat mouse at the foot of the tree and said in soft, polite voices, "Please, great Mr. Brown, will you favour us with your permission to gather the hazelnuts upon your island?" Old Brown did not speak. He only blinked his great eyes once and gently moved his wing, which the squirrels knew meant yes. Instantly, the industrious squirrels ran to the hazel bushes, their little paws working quickly, filling their sacks with sweet brown nuts. But where was Nutkin? Nutkin was not gathering nuts. He was dancing on a mossy log right in front of Old Brown's tree. He bounced up and down, tossing his golden hazelnut shell into the air and catching it, singing a silly riddle at the top of his voice. "Riddle me, rot-tot-tote, a little wee man in a red coal coat, a staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. If you tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat." Old Brown did not answer. He did not even look at Nutkin. He shut his eyes tight and went to sleep, ignoring the silly little squirrel. Nutkin, seeing no response, simply sat on a mushroom and played with his golden totem until the sun began to sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep amber and soft violet. That evening, the squirrels paddled back across the lake, their baskets full of nuts. Nutkin's basket, however, was completely empty, save for his single golden hazelnut shell resting at the bottom. The next morning, the forest clock ticked a little faster. Another layer of golden leaves covered the forest floor. The squirrels woke up early, eager to return to the island. This time, they brought a beautiful fat minnow laid on a bed of green clover leaves as a gift for Old Brown. They paddled across the quiet lake, landed on the shore, and marched to the great oak tree. Twinkleberry bowed so low his nose touched the moss. "Good morning, Honourable Mr. Brown," Twinkleberry whispered warmly. "We bring you this fresh fish from the lake. May we please gather more nuts on your island?" Old Brown opened one golden eye, looked at the shining fish, and gave a tiny, dignified nod. While the other squirrels hurried to the bushes, Nutkin decided to play an even louder game. He began to skip rope with a long piece of dry ivy right under Old Brown's nose. With every jump, his golden hazelnut shell clicked inside his pocket. Click-clack, click-clack. He stopped, looked up at the silent owl and chanted, "Arthur O'Bower has broken his band. He comes roaring up the land. The King of Scots with all his power cannot turn Arthur of the Bower." Old Brown did not move a single feather. He kept his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady, like the deep rhythm of the forest itself. Nutkin giggled, rolled his golden hazelnut shell across a smooth route, and spent the rest of the day chasing yellow butterflies, while his cousins worked tirelessly under the autumn sun. On the third morning, the mist over the lake was as thick as a white woolen blanket. The squirrels, ever diligent, gathered early at the water's edge. Today they brought a large, iridescent beetle, shining like a jewel in a small box made of dry leaves. They crossed the quiet water and reached the great oak. "Honourable Mr. Brown," Twinkleberry whispered, "we bring you this rare treasure. May we have your kind permission to fill our baskets once more?" Old Brown opened his eyes. They glowed like two amber lamps. He looked at the beetle, gave a slow, rhythmic blink, and stayed silent. But Nutkin was feeling bolder. He sat on a branch just above Old Brown's head, tapping his golden hazelnut shell against the bark. Tink, tink, tink. A houseful, a holeful, and you cannot gather a bowlful. Riddle me that, O wise one in the feathers. Nutkin giggled and threw a handful of dry cherry stones at Old Brown. The old owl remained as still as a statue, but a single golden dust mote danced in the air around his beak. He was waiting. Nutkin spent the afternoon spinning his golden shell on a flat mushroom, while the other squirrels worked until their little backs ached. By the fourth day, the wind carried the first sharp scent of the coming frost. The squirrels brought 6 fat, shiny flies wrapped in spider silk. "Great, Mr. Brown," they murmured. "The winter is coming fast. Grant us one more day." Old Brown took the flies and closed his eyes. Nutkin began to play marbles with 5 shiny pebbles and his golden hazelnut shell, right on the roots of the oak tree. He sang even louder. "Old Mr. B! Old Mr. B! Hickamore, hackamore, on the king's kitchen door. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't drive hickamore, hackamore off the king's kitchen door." Nutkin reached up and tickled Old Brown's tufted ears with a long, dry nettle. The owl's claws tightened on the branch, the wood creaking ever so slightly. Creak. But still, the owl did not move. He was a master of the quiet. On the 5th day, the squirrels brought a bowl of wild honey. It was sweet and golden. "Honourable Mr. Brown," they pleaded, "the baskets are almost full. One last day, we pray." Old Brown licked the honey. His eyes narrowed to thin slits of gold. Nutkin was now beyond all reason. He jumped onto Old Brown's back. He ran up and down the owl's wings, shouting his riddles, his golden hazelnut shell clicking loudly. As I went over Tippletine, I met a flock of bonny swine. Some yellow-necked, some yellow-backed. They were the very bonniest swine that ever went over Tippletine. Suddenly, there was a sound like a great book closing. Flap! Old Brown did not hoot. In one swift, silent motion, he reached out with his great velvet-soft talons. There was a scuffle, a flutter of fur, and a tiny squeak. The other squirrels fled into the bushes. They looked back and saw Old Brown holding Nutkin by the tail, carrying him up toward the dark hollow of the oak tree. Inside the hollow, it was quiet. Nutkin was trembling. He reached for his golden hazelnut shell, but it had fallen and cracked in two. Nutkin looked at his broken treasure, and then at the wise eyes of Old Brown. For the first time, Nutkin was truly quiet. He heard the wind. He heard the rhythm of the forest. Old Brown whispered, in a voice like the rustle of ancient leaves, "Little Nutkin, silence is a gift. Respect is the key that opens the heart of the forest. You have spent your days talking, but you have never truly listened." With a gentle nudge, Old Brown pushed Nutkin toward the opening. Nutkin had lost a piece of his tail, but he had found something much more valuable. Nutkin ran to the shore. He didn't have his golden shell anymore, but he didn't need it. From that day onwards, Nutkin was still the most playful squirrel. But whenever the wind grew quiet, he would stop. He would close his eyes, tilt his head, and listen. He learned that there is a time for riddles and a time for the beautiful golden silence of the soul. And so, as the moon rises over the quiet lake, and the squirrels tuck themselves into their cozy nests, it is time for us to rest too. The forest is safe, the secrets are kept, and everything is exactly as it should be. The end. Sleep well, little one. For more audiobooks for preschoolers or 3-year-olds, stay on our channel. Grandma will be here when you wake up.